Okay, why is it that we like Ren's Money Game Part 3 so much? Well, a lot of it has to do with music, and as I have said many different times, many different ways, and I'm going to say now, and I'm sure I will be saying for the rest of my life, good art is not an accident. It doesn't just happen to flow out by some mystical, undefinable, inspirational moment from some gifted person. It is true that the really great artists seem to have this extra element, this extra gift, or this ability to express, and sometimes it seems to be completely undefinable. And how on earth do they manage to do this? Because the rest of us are just poor humans. But nonetheless, I hold to my position that great art is not an accident. It doesn't happen by accident. And there are specific, identifiable reasons why great art is so great, and why it is that we connect to it, that we appreciate it, that we relate to it, and why it has such an impact on us when we understand. Well, let's talk about Ren's Money Game Part 3, because this is a really fine work. Not only artistically, but also message-wise. And to combine artistry with message is a real gift, or a real skill, or both. Well, I'm going to be looking at this primarily from the musical perspective. And I want to talk about how Ren's music accomplishes what it does in this video, and make some comparisons and connections between some other music that has similarities, some of which he's drawn on, others simply is probably unconsciously connected. So let's start with the opening. As I said in my first listen, it's clearly drawn from kind of a simplified version of Grieg's Piano Concerto in A minor. And I gave a little demo. Disclaimer right now, I am not and have not been preparing this for any performance, and I'm just kind of pulling it out of my back pocket cold, as you saw on my first listen. But that's enough for us to talk about what's happening in the music. So, the Piano Concerto in A minor by Grieg begins with this really bright, sharp A minor chord at the top of the piano. And then Grieg takes that chord and he walks us down the keys all the way to the lowest A, which happens to be the bottom note. He does so by taking us through A to E major. Those are the only two chords which he uses to get us all the way to the bottom. That's Grieg. Why am I talking about Grieg so much? Because Ren is using Grieg's music. And so Grieg takes us to an A minor arpeggio, which takes us almost back to the top, and then he goes on to other things. This is going to be a D minor chord, and then he takes us to an E major again for the cadence. Okay, that's Grieg. What about Ren? Well, as you can see, I have some scores already up on my keyboard here, but let's go to Rens Score and see what he did. So I'm going to pull up the score, which has a bit of the melody on it as well. But the piano starts basically the same as a Grieg, only not so expensively across the keys. we're more centered in the middle here. We have A minor, just as Grieg had. And then we walk to our E major. And then Ren walks us back to A minor. And then we walk to, this time it's an E major 7. So, and that's where he stops. He doesn't take us on to the other stuff that Grieg went on to. Well, it makes sense because Ren is using this as a launching point, an inspiration for what comes next. Now, in Grieg's concerto, what happens is then he runs us back up to the top of the piano with A minor, right? Remember? And so on, all the way to the top of the keys, and then we move on to something else. Now, Ren does something different. What he does is he uses the same A minor, but this time, he doesn't just take us to the top of the keys and move us to a cadence, a pause. Instead, he uses this as a launching point. And so this A minor then goes up and down, comes back, and goes to just walking up one chord, B diminished, B D F. And then after that, we go to a C major, stepping up again. And then to a D minor. By the time we get to the top here with D minor, which, well, let's just play it. And he kind of calms us down and brings us to a bit of a close. Something like that. Now, what is Ren doing with this music? Well, one thing I wanted to say from the beginning, and I guess I should say it right now, is that what I find in Ren's music is that his style, his way of using the music is very deeply rooted in what I'm going to choose to call Western art music tradition. I'm using that big term rather than saying classical music, because classical music is a bit of an ambiguous, confusing term, really. It's either used for a specific era, or it's used as a sort of blanket term for what are we talking about. So, Western art music tradition. That is the musical tradition which goes all the way back to ancient times, comes up through the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, and into the 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th centuries, 20th century, and now the 21st century. And the entire musical tradition carries us through there. Within that tradition, we do have Bach, we do have Beethoven, we do have all those household names, we do have Grieg, and now we have Ren. And one of the things that we find within this musical tradition is that a lot of the music, maybe even most of the music we could say, is built with an awareness and a concept of how different harmonic shifts, different musical movement figures, whether it's arpeggios up and down, whether it's chords, whether it's major, whether it's minor, whether it's a certain chord moving to another chord, all of these different things within the music, they have an impact on us, the listener, and how we perceive, how we interpret what we understand emotionally and message-wise through those sonic developments. And Ren's music shows a lot of these features. Well, obviously, from the beginning, he uses Grieg. And he uses it in a manner that kind of sets us up with this dramatic, little bit dark because it's in A minor. There's this suspense of this chord here, which is the kind of drum roll. What's coming next? Now when he uses the arpeggios up and down and up and down and up and down, what is happening? Well, he's kind of setting us up with this feeling of, well, it's a sort of progression. It's a sort of we could even say a roller coaster ride in effect. Up and down, kind of like waves, up and down, up and down. Why? What is the music doing to us there? It is sharpening our attention. It is drawing us in. It is giving us this feeling of activity and a sort of answer to the opening that took place. And it also kind of reflects Jimmy's life of perpetual motion, development, pushing ahead, moving on, rising to one, rising to the next, rising to the next. Even before we really understand or know anything about Jimmy's story, the music gives us this sort of premonition, we could say. Now, what comes after this? Because, of course, it's not all Grieg. And Ren didn't simply borrow from Grieg and stay there. He moved on. So let's see what else he does here. Well, another thing that he does is he uses chromatics fairly often throughout this. And we have this little chromatic line here, which is simply that's what's happening here. It's simply just walking down incrementally. Whenever I run into this sort of chromatic descent, it has a certain effect. Of course, it depends on context, musical context. But there are some very common effects that it gives, one of which is a kind of falling, descending. We've been on this great rise to fame, and then suddenly we start to slide down. It's a slippery slope, and that's kind of what I get from this. And then we pause here, and we almost feel like we're just hanging on a cliff. What is happening? How can we get out of this? And then suddenly the music shifts. Bum 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 dum da dum bum 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 dum da dum bum. Let's see if we can play this here. It's a completely different style. I guess I would say that this portion of the music here is the most rock style of the music that comes up, and it really does resemble a rock riff. Just imagine an electric guitar doing something like something like that, right? And then here come the drums. Bum 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 bum. Let's put them together. What if we even go an octave lower to really give it some meat? Okay, we've got this. It's harsh and it's angular and it's a little bit out of sync, because if we were going to be right on the beat, yum bum 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 bum, 1 2 1 2. You notice how my left hand is now striking before the right. I think I talked about that a bit in my first listen. You might want to check the video, because I mentioned how this really makes us feel off kilter, out of balance. Something is not right. And it's because of what's being manipulated in the beat here. This beat, 1 2, is the 2 is not being arrived at on time. So we end up with and we're left feeling like something is just off. something doesn't sit well. And at the same time, it's incredibly catchy and aggressive and solid. And so this kind of rock style riff here fits the darker side of this story, the side that is, even from the beginning, even as Jimmy is a child, a baby growing up, every child is innocent. At 1 year old, Jimmy has no evil intentions. At 2 years, at 3 years, at 7 years, he's a child, he's in school, he's developing, he's growing as he should, and he's trying to do his best. He's pleasing those who are guiding him and shaping him and directing him, and he's doing what every child does and ought to be able to do. Yes, okay, maybe he has a high IQ. Not every child has a high IQ, but, I mean, there's nothing wrong with Jimmy at this point. There's nothing evil about his character more than any other child. But we feel this from the beginning. And the music lets us know that even though Jimmy is a child here, the things that shaped him as a child put him off balance. They messed up his moral compass. And the music gives us this feeling of wrongness from the start through this handling of the beat and angularity and the awkwardness of this motif, this riff, I guess. Now that I'm getting into rock music a bit, because this is kind of a rock style, I'm going to refer to it as a riff. Those of you who've been following my journey are going to be proud of me. Okay, well, moving on. Then we come to an entirely different style. It shifts yet again. And here is where Ren begins to sing this beautiful melody. I can imagine it coming from some ancient world, some achingly beautiful land, some folk tradition. And well, Ren is Welsh, and we know that the Welsh have this rich tradition of music and singing, and I hear that and I feel that coming out, and it's just heartbreakingly beautiful. Isn't it lovely? But what's underneath it? We have the piano. Again, down in the deeper tonal end of the instrument. Notice all the open fifths. And you've heard me talk in some of my other videos about how fifths and fourths kind of can send us back to another time, another world, because of our association with them and the way music, Western art music, has developed through the years. And so this kind of sends us a little bit back towards the medieval era. But that aside, I mentioned also in my first listen how this music felt somewhat like a Pavon. And I pulled out a Pavon here, which I think will help you understand what I'm feeling and why I say that. What is a Pavon? Well, it's a very old dance form. Pavon comes from a word which means peacock, actually, because the idea is that it is an old dance that is a very dignified and kind of peacock strutting dance where the lord and the lady would enter the room in all their finery, and that and it developed it became very popular in Spanish circles, because in the 16th century, because it suited the mood that they wanted to have in court at the time. So it's a rather slow, stately, even somber dance. And there are hundreds, thousands, possibly even hundreds of thousands of pavans written. So this is by no means the only example, but it is one that I have played many times. Actually, I've played it on the harp. Maybe I'll play it on the harp, but I want to play it on the piano so you can compare the piano sound. Let's do that here. So here is Ren's piano. I'll just play a little bit more of it. Changes a little bit coming up here. Now it's walking down. You love those rich bass notes. One, two, three, four. One, we might even say 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and the similarity? Of course it's a different piece of music, but you could almost imagine the same person writing both of them. They feel like they came from the same era, the same world of music. And one is a Pavon and the other is Ren's piano music. And even going on to what comes next in the piano music. 1, 2. This is Ren. So we have the same quality. Isn't this rich? Let's take it up here. I love this clashing harmony here. That's so great. And then it repeats. What I'm saying is that this music that Ren has written, it's obviously original to him. And at the same time, it flows from a long, centuries, even millennia deep musical tradition. Has Ren studied this music as a deep tradition in the classical style? I don't believe so, but he doesn't have to have. Ren has ears, and Ren has a mind, and Ren has the sensitivity and the sensibility to take what he has heard through his life, what he has learned, what he has observed, and to apply it in a very artistically consistent and effective manner. I am not doing this to try to say that Ren is highly educated in classical music, or to say that he is uneducated in classical music. I haven't spoken to Ren personally. I haven't even had the time to dig through the interviews he's done on YouTube with various other people. So I can't say that I know a whole lot about him personally and his personal experience. What I am attempting to do here is simply to show how fine music, well-built musical art, has common characteristics. We can put our fingers on them, and we can handle them and manipulate them and analyze them and assess them and judge them accordingly. I don't mean to say that we have to say Ren gets a grade 8 and Grieg gets a grade 10 and this Pavon is by an unknown composer. So how are we supposed to grade an unknown composer? Should we? Shouldn't we? No, that's not my point at all. My point is, I love seeing good music being created. And I love seeing good music being embraced and enjoyed and absorbed by so many people, as so many of us are enjoying Ren's work. And my goal with this is to show you a little bit why you love it, and also perhaps to encourage you to explore a bit more. Go try out listening to some Pavons if you love Ren's style. Try listening to Grieg's Piano Concerto. Oh, it's fabulous. And listen to somebody who's really performed it, and get on YouTube and listen to one of the live performances that have been recorded, and just soak it in. Now, one other thing that I want to point out is, well, let's look at the string section for a few minutes. And I'm going to do this at the harp just to give us a different sound quality, because the strings were meant to contrast with the piano sound. And so it'll be kind of fun to bring it over there. So let's get down to the string section here. Right, and this is marked larghetto. It's slow, and we're in a different key. We're kind of set. Well, this is where it gets a little bit interesting, because our key signature is for B major. We have a B major chord. But as I'm looking through the music, I don't really see us anchored on B major. We're really sitting on the E. That's interesting. And as you listen, it gives a certain modal, not really modal, just the harmonic base of it doesn't feel incredibly deeply rooted in a location. And so we get this wonderfully rich, somber, meditative quality without it ending up being heavy. Listen, these are the first two notes. If it were in the key of E major, here's what it would sound like. There's a slight difference. Where? On the third note. Instead of, as Ren wrote, with this A sharp, we would hear A natural. That feels a little bit more at home. If I were to add some chords to it. feel anchored in E major. But what does Ren do? He gives us an A sharp. Suddenly we're not anchored here. We have this E, but this, so interesting. It keeps us from feeling like we've arrived here. It doesn't feel like that's home in the way that we would expect, and yet we settle there. Like it's constantly lifting us up simply by raising this pitch a semitone. He keeps us elevated, suspended, and in that way it's as if he is asking us to pull ourselves up out of where we have settled, where we have come to dwell in our own person. He's saying, loosen your roots a bit, get yourself movable, examine yourself in the mirror, and see if this is really where you want to be as a person. Is this really who you want to be as a person? Or is it time for a reset? Is it time for us to re-examine where we have aligned ourselves, our actions, our lives? Are they in line with what we would like to imagine we are morally, ethically, character-wise? Is who we like to think of ourselves as being, is that really who we are? And of course, it all depends on context, and it all depends on how all the elements are put together. Could I just pull this music out with no context and not knowing that it's part of Money Game and get that out of it? No, because it's simply a note that is a little bit different, right? But when we put it in the context, when we listen to what Ren is saying, when we consider the story that he has taken us through, and we understand what it is that he wants us to do, suddenly the music he has used as part of it perfectly fits. Not only does it fit, it enhances, it magnifies, it illuminates the message simply by little details such as this. Was Ren thinking about this when he wrote this? I'm quite certain no. Because even some of the great composers that we think of as household names didn't think in such symbolic terms. Some of them did, but many of them didn't. And from the little that I know about Ren, I don't believe he has the theoretical music theory knowledge to do that. Yet he has the instinct. And he knows instinctively when the music works to convey his message. And he has done a very beautiful job of bringing music, the spoken word, and the visual art into one unified whole to convey a very important message that we can all take to heart. And at the same time, it's not just a message. It is beauty. It is when you listen to this, it's absolutely lovely. We can immerse ourselves in this world of sound and feel at home in it, because it's not just some intellectual, mathematical combining of notes in some symbolic manner. It is a whole tradition and world of art and music, and this sits very solidly within that context. And because of that, we find that we can enjoy it simply isolated in its parts or as a whole. And it's beautiful however we turn it. And so maybe looking at these different elements today together has helped you to understand why I say with such conviction that great art is not an accident. It's never an accident. It never happens in a vacuum. It always happens in context and with meaning. And I want to thank each of you who encouraged me to check out this Money Game 3 and to keep up with Ren. And I'm especially going to mention Lee Kennison by name, because although many of you urged me, Lee Kennison did so in such a way that really made me sit up and take notice, and I appreciate that. And maybe someday I will get to sit down with Ren and talk to him about some of these musical things that I enjoy in what he's doing and have a bit of a dialogue. That would be a lot of fun. But regardless, I am going to make it a point to keep track of what he does and how he develops down the road, because I see a lot of potential, not just potential, but already a lot of depth to his work. And I appreciate work with depth to it, with real substance to it. And that is one of the reasons that I personally enjoy Ren's Money Game 3, as well as some of his other works that I've listened to. And maybe this helps you also understand some of why you like Ren's music in Money Game 3. Why does it appeal to you and draw you in? And of course, there are other reasons as well, and maybe you'd like to share them in the comments. And I'll be looking forward to the dialogue and discussion developing and continuing there. I'll see you next time.